to Datocracy, June 2024. It is surprisingly light out there, I guess because it's summer, not because it's early. Things look beautiful in the land of the midnight sun, or at least the land of the 11 o'clock sun. How are you doing, Tom? You're muted.
I forgot to unmute. Yeah. 10 p.m. here at the summer cabin on the Oslo Fjord.
Right. Ernest and I were just discussing, do you have like a business meeting scheduled at 10 o'clock at night, or is this some sort of social event? Oh, you muted again.
True. Yeah, we have a business meeting for my son's corporation, Graph Metrics. But it's a very informal, friends and investors and interesting people just have fun for 6 hours in the evening at the cabin.
Like a business reception, kind of a business social.
Yeah. So we're doing that all evening, but I'm taking a break from them now for that, for you guys.
Very kind of you. Do you, so the context of this is we had a discussion about the institutional architecture lab, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah.
And this idea of institutional architecture is interesting. I think one of the ways we ended up there is I said that, just having a plan in a vacuum is not very interesting. What's interesting is the relational context in which the planning occurs, and you identify sort of a community of stakeholders that can interact with the plan. And I think that's how we ended up in institutional architecture. And they have some interesting ideas, like they think about the question of, I think they define, actually, let me throw this in the chat. I finally got around to reading some of their documents at 11 o'clock last night.
Good. Okay, but you have read some, yeah. I also sent you both an update email from one of the founders, Professor Jessica, which I got yesterday. And make a long story short, she likes the ideas very much that I have about value and stakeholders and things like that. So I think we're a go there, but they're going to need some more time to make decisions. But I think I'm going to write a book on institutional architecture this summer as a gift to them, a handbook on how to design institutions.
Good. So this will be a vigorous debate, hopefully. I had two quotes I pulled from there, which is
by the way, before we forget it, you may or may not recognize this, but this is a Ukrainian pattern, and it's a Ukrainian sweater. And I got it from the lady who knitted it in Lviv, Ukraine, when I was holding lectures there. So it's my Ukrainian uniform.
Okay, is this a political statement of solidarity or just
absolutely? Okay. I'm with them all the way. Yeah.
Good.
Right.
Please go on.
Okay, so the two quotes, I put them in the chat, I'll put them in the notes as well, hopefully, is they say, I've always thought that a good way of defining institutions is as codifications of collective practice, which is an interesting phrase.
Yeah. Help me out there. I need to learn ways of interpreting what they're saying.
So I think the idea is that the reason we need institutions is to solve the collective action problem, right? How do you get a group of people to agree on what to do? And how do you not have to pay an enormous upfront cost every time to get everyone together? And avoid the free rider problem where like the people who care about the problem bear all the brunt and the people who get all the benefits do nothing. So the idea of institutions is you create these groups where like, okay, we all agree we're gonna do this, we're all gonna pitch in and make this happen. And then we're gonna keep this around as we did this once before, let's do it again, less painfully the next time we have a similar problem. So I always think of the old Nordic moot. I don't know if that's still a thing, but that was the idea that all the chieftains would get together in a moot, which I think is the origin of the word meeting. And they would get together to resolve their problems. It was almost a judicial sort of thing where they would, resolve conflicts.
Right.
And make decisions.
Icelandic meetings. I think so.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing. Yeah, they did that. They were very keen on that form of democracy, right?
Yeah, and of course, moot in English now means something that is totally irrelevant and doesn't actually accomplish anything.
Well,
but
here in Norwegian, the word for meeting is møte, and in Danish it's møde. So it's,
and in English it's murder. I mean, that is actually the tension, is if you have a thing that people feel obligated to show up for, it's a great way to get things done. It's also a great way to assert status and have a tranquilizer that makes you feel like you're getting something done, but is actually the opposite of taking constructive action. And I think that's part of their critique, is we created these institutions to help us get things done. And now the institutions feels like they're getting in the way of getting things done. And so that was the brief they set themselves, which is, I think, a noble goal. And I think they phrase this well in the second quote, which is that how to engage a group of people who are able to come together in a situation where there's sufficient trust, where there's understanding of the context, right? So the institution, like when you think about the business meeting you're having, like these people all understand the purpose of the business, they have the context, and you believe that all of these people have a stake in the business being successful. Like these people are not random trolls or competitors who are showing up to mess with you. You can assume that these people are well-intentioned and have at least a certain minimum context for making a decision. And therefore, if you can, increase the trust and then build decision-making, you have a high confidence that this will actually be better off than just going your own separate ways. And I think that's a good model of why people like institutions and why institutions might be necessary. And I think they make the case is that people who see all the flaws in institutions run away from institutions and try to do something else without owning the problem that institutions were designed to solve, which is getting people with shared context and shared trust to practice collective decision and collective action together in a way that is perceived as fair and legitimate and wise. So far, so good. I like the way that they frame the problem. I like their reason that they care about institutions. I have a number of thoughts about their project, but you've probably studied it more than I have. Ernest, did you have any initial thoughts? I don't know if you looked at any of the documents or from Tom or others. Oh, you're muted now.
Sorry. The ones in the email?
Yeah, the ones the older ones in the email. The more recent ones were about some of Tom's other projects, which may have confused the issue. But had you looked at anything on the TIAL website or any of those documents?
No.
That's fine. This isn't as much of an overview as I got in the last 24 hours. Tom, I was wondering if you wanted to at least give us a summary of your pitch to them, since you alluded to it earlier.
Okay.
Which is
now,
sort of a.
Do you have a copy of the pitch, or
I do. I can bring it up if that's useful for you, and if you don't have it.
Yeah, it's okay. But
accessible.
I'll give you an overview. So what I found is that, yeah, that's it. Good. Okay. And you got a copy of that, Ernest, at some point?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, we take the first slide. They have a thing called a toolkit, which is basically their way of designing institutions. So in a sense, they're doing systems engineering, where the institution is a system and engineering is the process of creating it or making it better. So, so the first slide, without going into detail, is simply the faults that I've found with it. For example, they have A in architecture in their name. They don't have anything I would call by architecture of any kind. That's a criticism. And then the next slide, fine if you put it up there.
Yeah, I just want to get the full screen here.
Oh, yeah, it could be bigger. Yeah. I won't, so my analysis first, I noticed that first I like what they're doing. They're designing institutions and trying to make the world a better place. So that's all fine.
Uh,
Sorry,
what I'm-
I'll get this up in a second. I'm having a little problem with my.
Okay, we'll just
I'll get
give
up
you
in
a
a second.
minute there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other thing I noticed and criticized indirectly and then constructively and more specifically is they're lacking the kind of my language methods, put it mildly. I mean, they don't have a notion of a clear, quantified definition of stakeholder values. And I think that's fundamental to their work. And so I'm criticizing the fact they don't have things like that and suggesting that I'm very happy for them to adopt whatever they can stomach of my methods there. And the letter I got from Jessica yesterday, which I sent on the email to you guys, basically said she likes this stuff and she understands that what I have written is very deep. And those are two good signs. I think she's a very smart lady. So
Are you seeing this, by the way? Is the screen share working now? Okay, very good.
Excellent. Yeah. So the not quantified values, this you'll recognize this from our earlier talks, that I believe that the value set were for the institution and the stakeholders has to be rather clear and not management bullshit level, right? And they are not there yet. But she didn't go into great detail in her email, but she did say, named the fact that she liked the values ideas, the stakeholders ideas, and the depth. She saw there was a lot of depth in what I was presenting. We go to the next slide. Anybody can read that anytime. But and again, you can compare your own analysis of it with mine. And so, broad policy ideas. What I'm trying to do is be nice and constructive and say, look, this is the way I'd frame it. And there's nothing anybody can be against there. But by the way, that link to Gilb.com won't work. No links to Gilb.com will work anymore, but I have replaced it with the competitive engineering book, which it says you have a copy of that in later versions. So this is, if you like, these are my elevator pitch for the policy. Then we have the principles, and again, it's language that if it was just jump for fun to something totally different, the prioritize efficiency in the middle there. You have to have a way of prioritizing what we're going to do. And they don't have a clear stated idea, but one clear stated idea that I like is whatever strategies have the greatest value over the lowest cost should be done first. That way you're going to get the most bang for buck, okay? But that needs to be an explicit policy and use tools like an impact estimation table to make it intelligible to people. So those are my principles.
Right. I would love to hear you elaborate on the new or evolve, because that's a point I'd like to bring up later. If you give your argument.
Yeah, you right now or later? Or right now?
Right now, since we're here, sure.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I'll read it out. It will normally be advantageous to build institutional improvement change into existing institutions, no matter how bad they are, and transform them through continuous change. Big bang creation of institutions usually carries far too much optimism and risk. Beware the suppliers who benefit from the large-scale big bang change, even when it fails. The decision to create new or improve old that's a typo, is an architectural choice based on many requirements. Okay, so this has been my experience from about 1960 in all of my projects, that the moment people said, let's build a new whatever, it always was years late, billions over budget, and didn't work at all. And then when I got involved and I managed to convince people, I put them on this path. I said, we know that your old system is total crap and everybody hates it. You know what? It's working every day for thousands of people. It's got a lot of good stuff there that you won't be able to reproduce instantaneously. There's too much detail, okay? So I suggest we attack the old system this is Evo. This is one incremental change step at a time. But we start from the old system because it is stable, because it does work, because it has faults that we can get rid of evolutionarily. So why should we rebuild 90% of the system, which is probably perfectly good? Now again, there are people who will benefit from rebuilding. They're the ones who sell the hardware and software to completely rebuild it, the suppliers. So they're always arguing that you can't have that old crap there. You have to have the new wonderful stuff. It's perfectly obvious, but they're really just trying to sell their kit. They couldn't care less if you are 5 years late and $5 billion and you die. Okay, so I have a very deep and long experience that of this principle, and it's in various of my books like Competitive Engineering. But people don't understand it. There's tremendous social and economic pressures to build the system anew, which are not based on making a better world. It's based on collecting money for somebody, whether it fails or not.
All right.
You got my pitch?
Yes, I got your pitch. Thank you.
Okay, we can discuss whether it's true or not, but I would say that's probably true of the institutions we're going to be looking at. There is some older form of the institution which is insufficient, and we would be better off using it as a base for incremental change. And I would predict, put money on the fact that we will get further faster if we do that than if we try to build a system anew with the well-known problems of, it was more complex than we ever imagined. We're only 5 years delayed. We're suffering from things like that with like medical systems in Norway, which are only billions of dollars over budget. They are years delayed, and the doctors are striking in the streets, saying, "Don't give us this stupid new system. The old system worked much better." I mean, that's a concrete example where we're living through right now in Norway. Okay, so then I turned to ChatGPT 3.5 for fun. I'm finding that this is very good at doing language. I've got a lot of different cases. You haven't seen all of them. I don't know if you've seen any of them yet. And I said, okay, give me some cost-effective strategies. I said, I'm going to use as an example, we're going to generate an educational institution like a new university or college or something. And I thought that will, they are university people, so that's a good start. And so I just, asked for some strategies, and it gave me some strategies. Then we can take the next slide, I guess. It's pretty, pretty good set of ideas. Put it this way: if you asked a human being to do that, they'd do something like that.
Yeah, no, it's a good summary of the current consensus.
Yes, something like that, right? And again, it's not that we're going to blindly accept what ChatGPT says, but we can use it. We can even have a little game. You generate 10 strategies, you generate 10, and we'll let ChatGPT do it. Then we'll compare and see what strategies we want to pick.
Sure.
And ChatGPT will be contributing ideas that we would have forgotten, but we actually believe are good ideas. Okay, so now here then is generating a simple impact estimation table, the objectives on the left-hand side and down, and the strategies over, and trying to do some kind of rating, very simply, low, medium, high. But it makes the point that a number of strategies, I just saw a mouse running. Yeah, a mouse.
Not a computer mouse, physical, biological mouse. A real biological live mouse under the. Okay, anyway, we know we got mice here, but we don't have the cat here. The cat. We need to bring the cat into play here. Anyway, I not only asked it to give me some strategies, but to rank them on how effective they were for the set of goals we had earlier. I'm not sure where the goals disappeared to, but they should be on one of the slides. Again, we cannot really trust what they do. We could try to and verify it and things like that. I'm assuming it's as good as human subjective opinion, at least, and maybe better.
Okay.
Yeah, my
Uh,
sense is that this is probably at the like 60 to 75th percentile of what you'd get from, uh, a plausible pool of humans. Like if you
Something
have
like that. Yeah.
yeah,
But the point is, it's good enough to do things like prioritize the most important stuff first, the most important third first. We'll probably get prioritized with this. And so the question is, should we use months to study and get more exact things, or should we just give it a chance to prioritize for us and dive in and do it? And I'm actually
yeah.
of the dive in and do it and get real feedback and real measurement from real systems.
Mhm.
Okay. That's another thing. If you use the old system, you have a real system to measure change on. And if you have a new system, you don't. You
Mhm.
cannot be agile and get good feedback on change.
Right.
Okay, so next slide. Always curious about references, so I'm giving it a chance. It's trying. I never heard of the Clayton Christensen Institute.
Oh,
but,
I know Clayton Christensen. I know people there. That's a real thing, and in fact, they'll come up
yeah.
in my
Okay.
comments later. But
yeah.
I'm curious. Who literally wrote the book called Class Disrupted on disruptive innovation.
Okay.
He's on
I'm glad to
another
hear that.
playlist in this very YouTube channel.
All right. Okay.
Interestingly enough. But
Okay.
anyway,
Now notice
that one's always credible.
Yeah, it isn't very detailed. In fact, ChatGPT is famous for evading giving you decent references.
Right,
So,
or giving you totally fictitious ones.
Yeah, right. So that's why
these sound like real institutions. So I'll give them points.
Well, it's trying. It's better than zero. But there's a thing called Perplexity AI. And Perplexity AI is famous for giving you good references, as many as you will pay for. So, but I did not use Perplexity AI on this. But if I wanted really good references, I would go to Perplexity AI.
It's more like this is like the kinds of places you should look for references, which is probably actually more reliable, even if less useful.
Yes. Okay. So it's a shot. I knew I wasn't. I was amazed
good
by how good it
on the
was.
part of Chat. Good humility on the part of ChatGPT, not giving you fake citations.
Right. Okay. So next slide. Now, what I did, I'm taking one of the top 10 strategies. We're doing language and Evo here, and I'm saying, okay, take the top one, which was implementing blended learning models. Okay, and I say now decompose it into 10 things that can be independently implemented. That is, we don't need to implement any of the others before we implement any one at random there. And it will have some effect, and we can measure that effect. This is what we do. This is primary tactic in Evo to get the ball rolling for huge complex systems. And it's, as far as I can say, it's very good at decomposing into a reasonable set. And that's, but this is how to dive into action. Yeah, and then now, then I'm saying, okay, what sequence would you put these 10 things in to have the most cost effectiveness first? I believe that's what we're doing. And that's, still step 1 first and step 10 next. I'm asking it to prioritize for me. So then I go back to where I should have started always, and so to stakeholders, and trying to make the point that they don't have they do say stakeholder. That was one of the things that Professor Jessica said she'd like, was my stuff about stakeholders. And so I know that any arbitrarily large number, like 60 million stakeholders, I think it would try. But I taking the number 30 to get way beyond the obvious few, like the students, the faculty, the finances of the university, and to show that there's a very broad list of stakeholders that, and then from the stakeholders we have to derive the values. Now, if we started out without doing this first, what I've proven actually by using AI recently is that you miss a lot of the critical values. if you don't start with a good and agreed set of stakeholders.
Right.
Okay?
I think what's
So
interesting about this is that this looks like the people are roughly sorted by their this may be important later, so I want to call it sort of their level of personal and financial investment in the university. Right, the administration has a huge financial stake in the university. Faculty has a very long-running stake in it. Students have a real and visceral but short-term. Alumni have a more tenuous one. Trustees, interestingly, somewhat possibly out of sequence, possibly accurately, have a stake below that of alumni and students. It's interesting, at least the way that it sorts them. Vested interest, right? It's sort of by the level of vested interest, I think. At least that's my observation of this list. I don't know if that's a fair interpretation, but I've observed. Are we still there? Did I lose you? I offended Tom so horrifically. He jumped off, or maybe the mouse got him. You following us, Ernest?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give him a minute. But this is the interesting thing to me, and this is actually the one that I want to talk about when I get to my section, is who are the stakeholders? And I think the really interesting thing is that phrase, I'll just read it here. Identifying key stakeholders interested in improving university value objectives involves recognizing individuals, groups, and entities that have a vested interest in the success and advancement of the university's goal and mission. And that's the interesting question for me, which is really the crux of institutional reform and change. Is a vested interest the same as the public interest?
The vested interest, looking at from the individual.
Well, think about like a school, like our university. There's an interest that the people who are in charge of the university in the university perpetuating itself versus the consumers of the output of the university who care about the ultimate impact of it more than they care about the survival of the university. And are those two in tension? Anyway, did you get back?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had an internet fault here.
Yeah, we thought the mouse got you.
Yeah.
Those Norwegian mice are pretty fierce from what I've heard.
What happened was we haven't got all our Wi-Fi systems set up, so the meeting wanted me to go away from the Wi-Fi thing outside, so I didn't disturb them, and then I lost my Wi-Fi. But they're down on the pier. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can see the group. They're down there on the pier. And so I'm up in the main room, and I've got my primary Wi-Fi connection going. Sorry.
All right, so we got maybe we can take another couple minutes and wrap up. Are you pretty close to the end?
Yeah. Is there another slide there?
Yeah.
So again, I'm asking for the top 10 stakeholders, give me 3 objectives that each one would be particularly interested in. I think that's a very interesting way of deriving the values, and again, if you ask for 10 values for 50 stakeholders, it would give them to you. Mm-hmm. But at least you have, let's just say you have a damn good checklist that most humans wouldn't be very good at. By the way, it's free and it takes 1 minute.
Yeah.
Difficult to beat. And it's superior quality to normal human beings.
Yeah.
So that it gives us a better, and then so that's just a detail of previous slide. But
and this is your commercial at the end.
Yeah. Well, that's something I did for another a Danish organization that also wanted to revolutionize the world. And it's you recognize the Val plan map there. Point I wanted to make there is we have automated tools that will help do this, and I avoided those in favor of AI tools in the early parts of it. That's all. We're done.
All right, great. Thank you, Tom, for that interview. I think it's a really good framing. And actually, I have a critique of, or maybe it's maybe not a critique, a refinement of what you're saying. And it gets back actually to the Clayton Christensen. Do you know who Clayton Christensen is, by the way? Wow,
No.
okay, there's a whole universe of like blogs and podcasts and scholarly articles and Harvard Business Review. But have you heard the phrase disruptive innovation?
Of course.
Well, that was invented by Clayton Christensen. I actually met him while he was inventing that in 1996, while he was still working as a consultant before he joined, I think, the Harvard Business School or published his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. And The Innovator's Dilemma was Steve Jobs' favorite business book. And Clayton Christensen tried to answer the question of why is it that incumbents in a field are often overthrown by new entrants, even though they have all the money, all the relationships, and all the talent?
That's a fun question.
And he had a rigorous data-driven answer to that. And I'll probably not do it justice, but the short answer is that they are locked into a certain measure of performance. So a good example of this is Intel in PCs versus mobile. In PCs, people cared about raw horsepower, but power, like watts, were basically free. In mobile, wattage is everything, right? The number of hours of battery life. And that's why the ARM processor, which didn't have the same raw performance as Intel until like the M1, was vastly superior for mobile, because for mobile, people didn't want to have enormous power as much as they wanted all-day battery life. And so the measure of performance changed. And the same thing when you went from mainframes to mini computers to PCs, you can see this trend all the way down, that when the measure of performance changes, healthy organizations are optimized around existing measures of performance and their best customers who give them the most money. And what he documented is that over time, a new entrant shows up with a worse measure, with worse performance along traditional metrics, but better performance along different metrics that matter most now. Like, so if you're, in the 1970s, you'd love to get a mainframe, but no one's going to give you $2 million for a mainframe. But you could buy a mini computer for $100,000, which is a lot slower, but it's easier to program and you can afford one and it solves your problem. And over time, those simpler technologies that perform worse have a faster rate of improvement, and then they eclipse the dominant model. Just like, PCs would rev every 2 years, phones rev every 1 year, and now the performance on a phone for many tasks, not all of them, is better than a laptop. And so this is the idea of disruptive innovation, is it's based on a different measure of performance, and that the institutional incentives are to focus on existing measures of performance that your best customers care about. And for a while,
very interesting.
And I remember when I was at Apple, one of my sales guys said, why is it that you guys are always dissing our very best customers? Like, our best customers use this product, they've been using it for 5 years, it solves their problem, they want more stuff. Why are you ignoring them? And it says, you have not read The Innovator's Dilemma. The way Apple survives into the future across multiple waves of computing is regularly firing its best customers in order to capitalize on the next big thing. And I don't know if Apple is still doing that or not. It'll be an interesting question how that plays out. But that was very much the Steve Jobs ideology. And the reason I think this is interesting is when I look at the problem that TIAL said they were intending to solve, right? If your question is how to make existing institutions perform better, I think your work is fantastic. Okay, it is clearly the gold standard for how to take an existing organization with an existing set of stakeholders and well understood value objectives and make it more effective through rapid, quantifiable, concrete learning. Unfortunately, that is not.
Okay. I want to. I know you're exactly there. Now, I see where you're going. So let me make the point. Once you have quantified value setting, there's nothing to stop you changing that any day of the week.
Oh, but that's precisely
and
why I'm
pivoting
arguing
in the right direction.
is that in
Okay.
every organization, there's an enormous amount of institutional inertia, culture, financial incentives, status, prestige, career trajectories built around those existing incentives and values. And the more optimum the organization it is, the more deeply entrenched they are.
Yeah, and I believe it, and I understand it. I agree. That doesn't mean you cannot use a tool of multidimensional quantified objectives to try to turn the ship a little faster, a little more often.
I would actually argue that, in fact, it does. Right? This was at least my experience as a management consultant for 2 years doing value management, trying to explain to businesses, oh, if you actually cared about your long-term value creation, you could totally rewrite your incentive rules for how you compensate how you compensate executives, how you time bonuses, how you measure business unit performance to create more optimal outcomes. The math was straightforward, obvious, fully documented. Nobody gave a flying fig because the institutional incentives were, well, I want to retire in 3 years and not be accountable for what the organization does afterwards. All my buddies who are really the peer group that I am judged by done that. And oh, by the way, we've been doing it this way for 50 years. And so there's no harm to doing it the same way. But if I take the reputational risk to say we should do things differently, then whether it succeeds or fails, people will hate me. And that was the world that I lived in. And one of the reasons I left management consulting and went to Apple is that the rhetoric of what people say they want to do and the reality of what they're able to do has this vast chasm called, for lack of a better term, vested interests. And I would argue that the root cause of what the problem TAL said they were going to solve is that, oh, our institutions today are out of sync with the problems we are currently facing. That does not seem like a controversial statement. But what I'll argue, I'll give like I'll give you a 3-minute pitch and then I will turn it over for discussion, is that the Christensen critique of this is that that's because the institution as a whole, up and down, culturally, financially, structurally, is optimized for a certain set of values. And most of those are unconscious. And the only way to tackle a different problem with different value measures, he puts this in the book in the very solution, is to create a separate business unit that is isolated from the parent business unit. So you can create a new culture with different incentives and different structures. And more importantly, to discover the right performance criteria, value objectives that actually matter, that you don't know in advance. That you have to, I mean, literally, I'm going with this week in my job is like, oh, our customers will tell us they want the thing that they know how to build, that we know how to build, that they know how to consume. But if I talk to them for an hour, in the last 30 minutes, they'll tell me, well, you know, what we really want is X. But of course, that's impossible and you would never do it. So I'm not going to ask you for X. Just give us Y because that's the obvious thing that everyone in this space does. But if we are actually trying to solve a problem that nobody has solved before, and as a tiny team outcompete the Goliaths, the only way we do that is to see the things that everyone else is trying very hard not to see that is actually blatantly obvious. And that's the one case, I'm saying most of the time, what you're describing is absolutely the right thing to do. That's the one case where building more infrastructure about what you consciously believe is the worst possible thing you can do, because the problem is precisely the people you are talking to, the people who have the power, who have succeeded in the old system, who are have a vested interest in it. They what is the Upton Sinclair quote? It is impossible to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on him not understanding it. And so this is the one case where the problem has changed. The performance criteria are not merely different, they are inconceivable from the current worldview. That's where you have to create a new institution from scratch based on a radically different and even antithetical set of values. And to do that, in my experience, requires either outsiders or deeply disaffected insiders who are willing to rebel. And you have to start from a new set of stakeholders, both the people solving the problem and the people you're solving the problem for, and then organically and irrationally have an emotional desire to discover emergently new value objectives and rebuild an institution. And you're right, most of the time this will fail horribly. But for this kind of problem, I would argue it's actually the only thing that has any chance of working. All right, end of sermon.
Sounds good to me. I don't dispute it.
All right, Ernest, any thoughts? Are you following any of this?
Yeah. I guess I can see that with Steve's parrots, right? I don't know if you read the book before that, but
Which book is it called?
no, you mentioned the
Innovator's Dilemma.
Yeah. But I see that Steve did that several times at Apple, right? With the Mac, he came back with,
My favorite one is the iPod. They had the iPod Mini, which was the best-selling music player, and they killed it in favor of the iPod Nano.
Yeah.
Right, which was worse on many dimensions, but they thought it was the future.
It was thinner. It was
right. It had fewer songs, but it was thinner and it was lighter.
Yeah.
And they believe that's what matters, not the number of songs.
Yeah. Thinner and lighter. Yes. And no hard drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has a few things that were,
they were quote unquote worse.
Yeah, but somebody, looked at the future and imagined people wanting to have, not to have this bulky thing in there.
They believe that people care more about, a new measure of performance being thin and light than the old measure of performance, which was the number of songs.
Yeah.
I want to summarize that from my language perspective.
Okay.
We have a situation where there are different stakeholders out there, in particular, a different potential market. They have different values. And if we're going to meet their values, we have to do a different design, which meets their values. And that's what's going on there. And then, that's
right.
That's the whole picture at a high level.
Right. And then the second, right. Thank you. That's beautiful. And that one definition of a social movement is a process that transfers power from one set of stakeholders to another. It's an interesting definition. And what's more important is that because the existing stakeholders have been the dominant cultural majority or cultural elite for a while, they control the language. And therefore, typically, the disenfranchised minority does not have good language for what they want. The American Revolution, before the American Revolution, as far as I know, the word revolution had been used once for William of Orange overtaking the existing royalty. Like the concept of a popular revolution didn't exist. They co-opted that term. They, put a lot of Voltaire-inspired language around this idea of freedom, somehow they managed to cognitively dissociate from slavery and, created a new thing. And the Martin Luther kind of did that all over again, Martin Luther King, right? And so the idea is, and this is the thing that I think the TIL people are blind to, and I have no idea how to explain it to them precisely because of this problem, is that the way new institutions get founded that actually work is by an irrational, nonverbal, emotional impulse that somehow people are able to bind together around. And it's mediated by, like communities of correspondence or whatever. But there is this irrational thing you can't explain. And the way you do explain it is mostly wrong. But it's enough to pull you together to engage in this epic journey. And once you're in that epic journey, you figure stuff out. And at the end, if you're lucky, you can wrap it up in a nice constitution and say, these are the principles we're going to use to govern ourselves. But that's totally not obvious at the beginning. And that to me is the thing that I think to solve the big problem better institutions that match the problems we have today, is you need a small group of people who are irrationally, emotionally committed to those actual problems, even if they can't articulate that well in words. And then to your point, I think I actually agree with the point you made, which I thought was brilliant, is that you need to then quantify what you think is true and iterate rapidly with the understanding that you're almost completely wrong. And the rapid iteration against an unknown reality and building the structures and systems and collective practices that allow you to do that is the key success factor. And I think that's actually interesting because what I'm hearing and seeing with you is that AI radically improves the cycle time of working with Valplan. Like, it's not hard to imagine if someone had a good month, you could create a Val bot that I could just feed it the transcript from one of our sessions, and it could create a coherent Valplan thing that we could manipulate the numbers and get and say, oh, that number's too high, this one's too low. Look at this research paper here, talk to this stakeholder over here and adapt it. And it turns what is currently a very left brain, analytical, numerical process into a much more organic, right brain relational process. It feels like you're not far from that in your AI prototyping. And then that makes it really interesting. And that gets back to my CREA, right? The completely reliable interlocutor aggregator. The idea that we could create and this was the other thing that's come up in a different context. I think we touched on it in one of our Datocracy sessions about semantic modeling in AI, in that you have not just the syntactic modeling that most AI does, but then you can expose its semantic model, and then you can have other AI models work on the semantic representation. A little bit like the liquid neurons bit from MIT, where instead of looking at a bunch of abstract neurons, you have one that shows, lane position, and one that shows other cars, and one that shows the car's velocity, is that you have semantically meaningful representations, and then you can train higher order models on the semantic representation rather than just on the low level syntax. And that's actually exciting. You can imagine then having higher order conversations that are emotionally meaningful, even if you don't have the right words. And to me, that's the thing that actually creates these beautiful human connections that inspires people to pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to create new institutions from scratch that actually work, right? The American Revolution is one of the very rare cases that they kind of bootstrapped a new society in the space of about a decade that actually worked better than the old one. And the idea is that was really hard.
I would be really interested if we could somehow, let's say, write down or make more concrete the ideas that you've been expressing about, the soul and motivation and spirit behind things and how that fits. Because I think it's a very interesting question, and I don't feel I know enough about it or have enough good answers. And I would be prepared to work on it, and maybe, if relevant, bring it to the attention of TIAL
Yeah.
when I start working with them. But we have to, you articulated the ideas, and I thought it was interesting. But now we got to get it in a format I can deal with, which is probably a written format of some kind, whether it be diagrams or words or tables or models. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that is a great challenge. Let me see if I can capture this at least as a label.
I think a one-page model with the emotional, motivational things on part of the model, and then decisions about constitutions and people as stakeholders floating around. Something like that would maybe help make those ideas clearer to me and other people.
And there's a model. This may not be the right thing, but it's handy, so I will grab it. I was discussing with my mentor who works in the AI space, and we talk a lot about transformational change and systemic change and emergent networks, which is the model of the human brain, where you have the left verbal brain, which is very goal-oriented, rigorous, logical, quantitative. And that's very teleological. It's focused on a goal. And then you have the right brain, which is really about situational awareness. It's building this comprehensive sort of analog model.
I think there is some promise in that basis. Yeah, the brain. Right. Maybe with other parts of the system, like the body.
And then the interesting
eyes.
thing was that LLMs today are like the left brain. And assuming liquid neurons are not just a fad or vaporware, the idea is that liquid neurons are actually really good at the sort of analog modeling and situational awareness. And then the hypothesis that we had was that things like stable diffusion, where you map images onto words and words onto images, could be the corpus callosum that bridges between the analog model right brain liquid neurons and the linear model left brain LLMs. And I don't know if that's possible or not, but it's at least a very tantalizing idea, is that you have these rich analog captures on one hand that capture semantic concepts that are important, but doesn't try to force them into existing words. Then you've got incredibly sophisticated verbal language processes over here. And then you have these bridges of image to text, text to image, analog to digital, if you will, that create these resets, right? Like every good movie has this thing where the character starts with one worldview of what he thinks the problem is, and then he fails, and then he has a transformation and he succeeds, of some kind. We watched Inside Out 2, by the way, which highly recommended. It's all about the abject emotions that you stuff away in the back of your brain. And just like every institution ignores all the data that's contrary to the problems that they were originally designed to solve. And the idea is that that's stored in the back of our brain, in our right brain. And a lot of therapy that I've gone through is precisely about bringing those abjected emotions and data points into the conscious awareness, and then having a dialogue, literally a dialogue where you reconcile, and parts of you have to die so other parts can live. But if you do it right, more of you is living. There's a generative process that comes from that. Ernest, have I lost you completely, or are you still tracking? And you're muted.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'll take that as a homework item, is to write up either this model or an iteration of that, because I think it's really important to think about, when these things matter. And this is a problem that I've been worrying about a long time. Like, there's lots of solutions that work well at stages 4 and 5 that are completely useless at stages 1 and 2, and vice versa. And I have an 8-phase model in a theological context about the sort of internal and external character growth. And it would be a great challenge to reformulate that in a way that could make sense to TIL, is that if this is your kind of problem, then an iterative approach is good. But if this is your problem, then a disruptive approach is better. And that's, building on Peyton Christensen did it in a sort of a business context, but doing that in a public institution context is something I'm very concerned about. A brief commercial, because it'll happen between now and then. I have a group that's trying to put this into practice on the issue of political polarization in America. And we've been having a discussion about this for 6 months and raising money and writing pitches and all this stuff. And where we finally bottomed out was, I just need to go out and buy cookies for my neighbors whom I disagree with politically and get them to let me take a selfie with them and post it on Facebook and see if I can get other people to say like, hey, just because we disagree politically doesn't mean we can't be kind to one another. And it may not work, but like it fills me with anxiety to have to do real world analog tactical things with human beings near me rather than abstract intellectual discussions with people on the other side of the planet. But it feels like that's the sort of thing that could work, right? It's a dramatic analog act that when people see it, if it resonates with them, that we're going to try and get people to copy it and go viral. God only knows if that's going to happen. That's the sort of idea.
Yeah, let me mention a group I worked with and did language modeling with called Abraham's Reunion.
Yes.
And in spite of what's happened in the Middle East, the basic idea was get all these enemies to sit down and have a meal together. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah,
and not very successful in Gaza right now, but
yeah, that's always been the problem. This is what I discovered is that conquering with love is more effective, but conquering with violence is more efficient. And so,
oh dear,
yeah, the whole dance of Mars.
What a note to end on. By the way, I sent you guys my latest writings in 2 emails.
Yes.
There's one called Responsibility, which might particularly interest you, but there are several others, just what's happening with me.
All right. Yes. Thank you. And it's always good to have, thank you so much for your son lending you to us. I'll try and pull out the Responsibility one and send that around just so we look at that. And also a reminder of my homework. And we'll see you all in a month. Assuming one of my neighbors doesn't shove the cookies down my throat and strangle me.
I'll look at Clayton.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.